So AMD may be releasing a new GPU, and it's a little bit weird because we're kind of like in a GPU desert right now. Yes, nobody's buying GPUs. It's very, very few are being sold now compared to the last few years, but at the same time, prices are still very, very high. Yes, we've seen some discounts. I was actually looking up a 4060 today and I saw it for a $10 discount. That's not bad off of like a 4060, which just came out and literally is the cheapest next generation GPU. Of course, we're seeing a lot of discounts also on the AMD side, specifically 7900 XTX and the 7900 XT. Before we talk about this new GPU that AMD is supposedly going to be releasing anytime now, we have to talk about these two GPUs that have already come out on the high end, the XTX and the XT. One had an MSRP of $999, the other one of $899. We can agree that the 7900 XTX, the $999 one, was received like fairly well, you could say, when it came out in terms of its performance for the dollar. It had problems with the reference edition coolers, AMD usual driver issues and things like that, so it was not perfect, along with AMD's marketing team always making a little snafu here or there. But overall, it proved to be pretty performant versus even like the RTX 4080 if you remove the LSS out of the equation and maybe some power efficiency and things like that. And now let's hear a word from our sponsor, VIP-CDKdeals.com, a Windows 10 Pro CD key. Add to cart, you put in code CC20. This will also work on Windows 11. You want to go into your settings in Windows, change and adjust your CD key, click activate, and now let's go back to the video. But overall, that was a decent GPU. Then we get to the 7900 XT. In my opinion, this GPU should have been a 7800 XT, much like last generation we had that division and distinction between these two GPUs. 7900 XT at $899 did not work. Nobody wanted to buy this GPU at this price, even though 20 gigabytes of VRAM, that's a pretty healthy number compared to what NVIDIA is giving us. Basically, that's even more than the 4080, which is considerably more expensive, but still was not enough to really, convince gamers to pick this GPU up. $899 is way too close to the $9,999 7900 XTX, which makes it a terrible value proposition. Now, we're getting discounts. Even the 7900 XTX, a few weeks ago, I remember seeing one dip under $900. Likewise, it's much easier now to find the 7900 XT for under $800, maybe like $750 or something like that. You can certainly find them. I haven't quite seen them hit the $600 range to compete with something like a 4070, for example, but we certainly have seen it under $800. That leads us to the GPU in question that AMD is supposedly releasing, and this GPU is going to be the 7900. Not the XT or the XTX, but just the basic 7900. What are going to be the major differences? Well, judging from some facts that we've seen so far, it seems like a lot of its specs are actually very similar to the 7900 XT. It seems to have a lot of things in common, like with the clock speed and things like that. A few notable areas, however, where it is certainly going to differ: 16 gigabytes of VRAM as opposed to 20 gigabytes of VRAM. That is certainly not something to complain about, since NVIDIA gives us 16 gigabytes on the 4080. Everything else is like 12 and below. And then, of course, you have to go and get a 4090 if you want to get anything over 16. If you want to hit 24 gigabytes of VRAM, NVIDIA just gives you the option of a 4090. So you either go to the extreme case or you deal with a lot less VRAM. On AMD's side, they're a lot more generous with their VRAM, even though it's maybe not as fast VRAM with the bandwidth and things like that as NVIDIA may offer. Overall, you're still getting a lot more of it. 16 gigabytes of VRAM on a 7900 is not a problem. That's definitely what you could call the sweet spot of VRAM and the minimum we should be getting on these more high-end and high-performance GPUs. And then things like power draw seem to be roughly right around 300 watts and thereabouts. So Those are some interesting things about that GPU. 7900, 16 gigabytes of VRAM. What we don't really know, first, is it definitely going to come out everywhere? As far as we know right now, maybe this GPU may only be in like the Chinese market or something like that. Even though it would make sense for them to release something like this as like a high-end but a little bit pared down alternative to what else is going down in the market. But what would the price be? What would the price have to be for it to be a successful GPU? Let's look at some facts here. The 7900 XT at $899 really failed quite miserably, so we can get really far away from that number. $799 would not work at all, simply because, look, the 7900 XT is already selling for under $799. We see deals, let's call it maybe $750 is a price that is, easy to find for this GPU. $699 not yet, but $750. So that would put the 7900 potentially at $699. That's kind of like not even being, too aggressive with the pricing. That's like a conservative pricing for where they could potentially sell that GPU. So let's kind of like stop the clock right there at $699 and see if it's something that people would buy. So would be pretty good with 16 gigabytes of VRAM. I mean, the next GPUs that are available either right below it or right above it from NVIDIA are the 4070 or the 4070 Ti, both of which only have 12 gigabytes of VRAM. And a 7900 still has a lot in common with a 7900 XT, so you can assume it would likely just perform better than the 4070. Against the 4070 Ti, harder to say. It could depend on the game. If it's something that you need DLSS 3 for, of course, you're definitely going to want to go towards NVIDIA. And the 4070 Ti has also seen some discounts, even though not quite as aggressive as some of the AMD GPUs. We've definitely seen it sell for cheaper. So $699 would make, on the surface at least, a lot of sense. I mean, it's $200 technically cheaper than the 7900 XT, even though that one sells in the mid $700 range. And it's a way for AMD to sort of provide a little bit of a spec'd down GPU and also give you some price savings. Would it really sell at $699, however? I can still see a lot of gamers just going for a 4070 and saving $100. It's still going to be very, very competitive. That's because NVIDIA just has a huge mind share, along with their market share, that anything AMD does has to be really good. The GPU has to be priced very aggressively, and it has to perform really well. Drivers have to be stable for, I think, gamers to really even start looking. If you take a look at like the Steam surveys, for example, AMD generally is nowhere near the top. NVIDIA is highly dominant in where gamers actually use these GPUs. So $699 makes sense, but I don't know how many people would actually go for that GPU. I don't honestly think there's a very pent up demand for expensive GPUs. That's part of the problem. There isn't a thing saying that if it was $649 instead of $699, does it mean it's going to sell like hotcakes? Well, maybe it'll sell a little bit more, but people don't really have the stomach to buy these expensive GPUs right now. That's part of the reality. They really wanted to see affordable 4060s or affordable 4060 Ti, which we didn't really get exactly. The 4060 is not terrible, but the 4060 Ti has been pretty much really bad at $399 with only 8 gigabytes of VRAM. That's where AMD with the 7600 and other GPUs should have a lot better chance at competing with NVIDIA. So that's part of the problem when we're talking about these still pretty expensive GPUs in that $700 range. Sure, it may be cheaper than what came before, but it doesn't mean that people really want to buy it anyway. AMD really wanted these to sell well. Maybe a $599 price is hard to ignore, but then can you really see them selling a 7900 class GPU for $599? That's going to completely dilute their entire, value for the other GPUs. Unless they really plan to bring everything down. Maybe they plan to bring the XTX down to $899, and then maybe $699 makes more sense for the 7900 XT. Then $599 would make sense for a 7900. Maybe they should have called it a 7800 XT then. Maybe that's really the difference. So that's why I don't know if I like that 7900 name. If they call it a 7800 XT, sell it for $599 or at most $649, that could certainly start to become an option for more people. And I still don't think it's going to sell like hotcakes, but $599, it may start to sell a little bit more than we're used to, because look, 16 gigabytes of VRAM will be hard to argue against. Much like in the cheaper levels of the GPUs, look at the 6700 XT with 12 gigabytes of VRAM. That one is definitely a recommendation over a lot of NVIDIA GPUs like the 4060 Ti, simply because it has similar performance and it has more VRAM. So they can do the same thing in this sort of $600 to $700 price class. If they would price it that low, I don't really know. I mean, look, the 6800 XT, which was at $649 back then when it launched, I don't know if they're going to go under that price for a 7900. That's why the naming kind of worries me, that they want to keep it above $699 or maybe even $799. So that's something that they could definitely do. I could see a $649 making sense for both AMD and some consumers with 16 gigabytes of VRAM. You're kind of like almost there at the 4070 level, but then AMD would be giving you a lot more VRAM. So that's certainly something to think about. All right, guys, let me know what you think. Do you think this GPU is going to come out at all? What do you think it's going to be priced at? That's what I'm really curious about. Remember to subscribe, smash that like button, and I'll see you guys on the next video.